Sign here, Mr. Cooper. The assistant's voice came out almost in a whisper, and for a second, time seemed to stop. The distant sound of footsteps in the hallway, the air conditioning blowing too cold, everything reminded me of the day I was fired. The same desk, the same smell of bitter coffee and expensive perfume. 18 years ago, I was on this side of the room, trying to understand what I'd done wrong. Today, I'm the owner of the company that let me go. The man sitting across from me, Richard Evans, watches me with dull eyes, trying to hide his defeat. He feigns dignity, but the tremor in his hands gives it all away. The irony is almost cruel. He fired me with a speech about loyalty and competence, and now he's signing his own surrender. The white lights reflect off the building's glass, and I see my own silhouette, the young man from before and the man now, fused in the same reflection. My name is Ethan Cooper, and I was an employee of this company for 18 years. I gave it everything: time, nights, dreams, even my health. I was fired without warning, without gratitude, and without explanation. That day, I left here swearing I'd never set foot in this place again. But fate doesn't care about oaths. It likes full circles. Sign, Ethan, he says, trying to keep an authoritative tone. It's Mr. Cooper to you, Richard, I reply with a half smile. The pen slides across the paper, and the sound is almost poetic. The same gesture that once expelled me from here now seals my victory. I say nothing. Sometimes silence carries more weight than 1,000 speeches. When I finish, I close the folder slowly. Richard still tries to find words, but he only finds his own regret. I stand, adjust my jacket, and look around. Everything seems the same, but nothing is. Every detail is a scar I learned to turn into a trophy. And as I leave that room, I think, revenge, when it ripens, tastes like peace. In the hallway, the curious glances of the employees follow me. Some recognize the name, few remember the face, but no one knows what this signature means to me. It's not just the purchase of the company, it's the closing of a cycle. And deep down, it's the story of how failure can become the best investment of your life. 18 years ago, I still believed that hard work was enough. I arrived early, left late, wore the Lexton Industries shirt like armor. Richard, the CEO, told me I was the promise of the new generation. I believed every word, thinking loyalty was enough. But in the corporate world, loyalty is currency, and I was just a disposable asset. That Friday, the office atmosphere was strange. People avoided my gaze, and the HR phone kept ringing nonstop. I didn't know it, but the board needed a scapegoat, someone to answer for a mistake that wasn't even mine. When Richard called me to his office, I thought it was a promotion. I left there with a cardboard box and a hole in my chest. You no longer fit the company culture, he said, without looking me in the eyes. The phrase echoed like a sentence. I remember the sound of keyboards, the muffled laughter of some colleagues, and the feeling of being erased in real time. I passed by Claire, a colleague who tried to tell me something, but I was deaf with shame. It was raining outside. Each drop seemed like fate's laughter. I got home without the courage to tell anyone. I spent the night staring at the ceiling, trying to understand what I'd done wrong. The next morning, I put my badge in a drawer and closed it, like burying a dream. But something inside me ignited. A cold, calm voice said, "You'll come back." I didn't know how or when, but I decided to turn that firing into fuel. If I wasn't good enough for them, then I'd be good enough to buy the place. And so began the part of my story no one saw. The work in the shadows, the learning, the falls and restarts. Revenge wasn't born from hate. It was born from the desire to prove that no one destroys those who believe in themselves. The following years were a survival manual. I worked in cafes, fixed computers, did cheap consultancies. Every failure was a disguised lesson. Little by little, I began to understand how the market thought and how power moved. The loyal boy turned strategist. The pain of the firing became my silent MBA. And while everyone underestimated me, I planned my return, one step at a time. In 2012, I met Michael Reed, an investor who saw opportunities where no one else did. He believed in me when I didn't even have a business card. Together, we founded Cooper Dynamics, a small company but with a difference. We did what the giants thought impossible. We worked nights on end, fueled by coffee and contained rage. And as the business grew, the past called to me more and more. One day, during a conference, someone mentioned the name Lexton Industries. I felt a shiver, as if the past had entered the door uninvited. The company was in decline, lost in scandals and mismanagement. I smiled. The universe is a patient accountant, and I was ready to settle the accounts.
If you've ever been underestimated, if they've ever told you you couldn't make it, stay with me, I said at the opening of a talk. Because sometimes revenge isn't shouting. It's coming back and signing the contract that fired you. The audience laughed, not knowing how real those words were. The first time I saw Claire Mitchell after all those years, she seemed unchanged. The same analytical gaze, the same calm disguised as coldness. She was now CFO of Lexton. She saw me at the event and froze. "Ethan Cooper?" she asked, as if saying the name of a ghost. I smiled. "The same, just this time on stage." Backstage, she called me over to talk. She said Lexton was sinking and the board was seeking buyers. When I mentioned that Cooper Dynamics was interested, she laughed, incredulous. "You want to buy the company that fired you?" I leaned in and replied softly, "I want to buy the silence of the story they told about me." Claire warned me that Richard Evans still had influence on the board. "He'll recognize you, Ethan, and he'll fight dirty." I just smiled and said, "Then nothing's changed." As she spoke, I realized something in me still bled, but it wasn't anger. It was the echo of 18 years of effort without recognition. I didn't just want to beat Richard, I wanted him to see me win. That night before bed, I opened my laptop and looked at an old phrase I'd left stuck on the screen, written on the day of my firing. "They took my badge, but not my purpose." And I realized that deep down, revenge was no longer about destroying someone. It was about rebuilding the man they tried to erase. I started buying small parts of Lexton through intermediary funds. Nothing too big at first, just enough to go unnoticed. Week by week, another slice, another precise move. Michael thought it risky, but I saw it as an art. The art of toppling an empire using the same weapons it created. The name Cooper Dynamics never appeared in the records, just the numbers and the fear they caused. Claire helped me from the inside, discreetly. She sent reports, meeting alerts, and kept me informed about the board's steps. I trusted her, but I knew in the corporate world trust was volatile currency. Still, there was something in a gaze, a mix of admiration and guilt. "You're really doing this," she said one day. "No, Claire," I replied. "I've already done it. I'm just waiting for them to realize." The news began to spread. A mysterious group is buying Lexington shares. Analysts tried to guess who was behind it, but no one suspected the ex-employee who had swept the office floors nearly 20 years ago. Sometimes I looked in the mirror and saw the reflection of a stranger, someone who turned pain into discipline and resentment into strategy. And then, on a Friday morning, I received a short, direct email. Extraordinary board meeting. Mandatory attendance for all major investors. I smiled. It was the moment. After years digging in the dark, I would finally see the sun and the man who tried to bury me. The boardroom was exactly as I remembered, cold, elegant, and full of hypocrisy. I entered with a serene face while the directors whispered among themselves. Richard Evans was at the head of the table, gray hair, hard gaze, trying to feign control. When the board chairman announced my name, the silence was almost sacred. Gentlemen, I present the new majority investor, Ethan Cooper. Richard's eyes widened as if he'd seen a ghost that doesn't believe in eternal rest. You? He murmured. Impossible. I sat across from him, calmly. I said I'd come back, remember? His face paled. The other directors exchanged glances, trying to understand the tension cutting the air. It was like watching a ghost materializing to collect its debt. The following hours were a game of masks. Richard tried to keep a professional tone, but every word sounded like a disguised plea. I, on the other hand, maintained control. The boy who once left humiliated was there, looking at the man who discarded him without remorse. What goes up, Richard, one day comes down. The difference is that some learn to fly in the fall. When I left the room, Claire caught up with me in the hallway. Ethan, what are you going to do now? I looked at her and replied, what any man would do returning to the place where he was destroyed. She frowned. And what is that? Rebuild, but this time from the top. In the following days, the name Ethan Cooper ran through the Lexington hallways like an urban legend. Some employees vaguely remembered me. Others found it unlikely that an ex-analyst had returned as owner. But Richard knew. He saw me as a threat time couldn't erase. And maybe I was. I was the result of every humiliation he pretended to forget. During a meeting, he tried to expose me. He said I didn't have enough experience to run a corporation of that size. I let him speak, calm, waiting for the right moment. When he finished, I looked straight at him and projected on the screen an old image, the email of my firing, signed by him. You're right, Richard. I didn't have experience, but I learned fast enough to buy the place you destroyed. The impact was immediate. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the distant sound of the air conditioning. Some executives looked away, others swallowed hard. Richard was speechless, and for the first time I saw fear in his eyes. Not fear of me, but of the mirror I represented. I was the reflection of what he could have been if he'd had character. After the meeting, Claire called me to talk. You got what you wanted, Ethan, but, and after. She was right, and I knew it. Power is a trap disguised as victory. Sometimes the throne is just a cell with a panoramic view. But I wasn't ready to stop yet. After? I asked. After comes the settling of scores. That night, back at the hotel, I looked at the New York skyline and wondered if I was winning or just turning into another version of Richard. The city seemed to breathe with me, each light on a reminder that success without purpose is just a more sophisticated form of loneliness. Michael, my partner of years, started acting strange. He avoided meetings, gave vague answers, and seemed more interested in protecting his reputation than our plan. Until one night, I received an anonymous message. Your partner is selling information to the Lexington board. My blood ran cold. The man who walked with me from the beginning was about to stab me in the back. I pretended not to know. I waited for the right moment to confirm. In a private meeting, I showed him a fake document with confidential data. Hours later, the same document appeared in Richard's email. The betrayal was proven. When I confronted him, Michael didn't deny it. "You've changed, Ethan." This became an obsession. I just did what I needed to survive. I looked at him and saw the reflection of the man I feared becoming. "Do you know the difference between us, Michael? I fought monsters, but I never wanted to be one." He didn't respond. He just lowered his head, like someone realizing he'd sold something money can't buy, his own respect. I fired him on the spot, without anger, without shouting, just the weight of silence. Sometimes revenge comes with a receipt the ego can't pay. Claire was furious when she found out. "You're surrounded by wolves, Ethan, and you still think you're the hunter." Maybe she was right. The problem with hunting the enemy is that sometimes the monster you're chasing lives inside you. And in that moment, I realized revenge has a price no one warns about. It doesn't charge in money. It charges in humanity. Still, I didn't stop. I was too close to back down. The shares were about to close, and Lexington would officially be mine. The boy who was fired had won, but the man who bought it all was starting to wonder if he was still the same one who wanted to win. I thought I knew everything about what happened 18 years ago. I thought my firing was just Richard's cruel whim, but I was wrong. One night, Claire called me for coffee and placed an envelope on the table. Inside were copies of emails exchanged between board members, my name highlighted. That fateful day wasn't a punishment. It was a cover-up.
The mistake that cost me my job was part of a multi-million-dollar financial diversion. I discovered the numbers without realizing what they meant. The board, desperate, needed a scapegoat. Richard just followed orders. The enemy I chased for nearly 2 decades was just a pawn. The soldier who carried the blame to protect invisible generals. And that truth hit me like a slow punch. I felt anger, but not the same way. It was an empty anger, without direction. Everything I'd built, every sleepless night, every drop of blood and pride was based on a lie. The revenge that kept me alive no longer had a face, and when the enemy loses its face, purpose loses meaning. Claire watched me in silence, like someone seeing another discover their own war was pointless. "Ethan," she said, "now you have the power. You can destroy them all." I shook my head slowly. "Or I can do something they never did." She raised an eyebrow. "What?" "Be better." That night, for the first time, I slept in peace. Not because I won, but because I understood that true victory is stopping the wrong war. The next day, watching the sunrise reflected in the skyscrapers, I realized true power wasn't in owning the company, but in deciding what to do with it. And in that moment, I knew revenge was over. The legacy was about to begin. I arrived at Lexington at 8 sharp. The meeting room was full. Lawyers, directors, journalists. The atmosphere was tense, the air heavy, as if everyone sensed it would be a historic day. Richard was there, aged, with a tired gaze. When we met, he lowered his head without arrogance. Maybe out of guilt, maybe respect. It didn't matter anymore. I'd already forgiven him before arriving. The lawyer announced, "We're here to formalize the transfer of control of Lexington Industries to Mr. Ethan Cooper." The pen slid across the paper, and each stroke seemed like a thread breaking between past and present. I looked around, the same office, the same walls, the same coffee smell. The difference was, this time, I wasn't being expelled. I was signing a new beginning. When it was all over, I stood and extended my hand to Richard. He hesitated for a second, then shook it firmly. "You won, Ethan," he said. "No, Richard. This time, we all win. I lifted the weight of the past, and you got a chance to do something right before leaving." He looked at me in silence, and for the first time, I saw something I never imagined: genuine regret. Outside, the camera flashes blinded me for a moment. Reporters asked about the purchase, about my return. I just smiled and said, "Today is not a story of revenge, it's a story of return." The audience listened, but few understood. It was a victory that didn't fit in headlines, only in the heart. I returned to my new office, closed the door, and stared out the window. Below, the city followed its frantic rhythm. I thought about who I was and who I'd become. Life is funny. It fires you to teach you to rehire yourself as someone better. And in that instant, I realized the humiliated boy who left had finally gone. In his place stood the man who learned to turn pain into destiny. The auditorium was packed. 100 faces watched me, some curious, others suspicious, few truly attentive. Those were the same hallways where years ago I walked like a number. Now, each step echoed differently. I went on stage without papers, without a teleprompter. I didn't need to read anything. I lived every line of that story. And that's why every word came with the weight of someone who bled in silence.
18 years ago, I was fired from this very building, I began. Expressions changed, whispers spread. At the time, I thought it was the end. But today, I understand it was just the beginning. I told about the years of learning, about the mistakes that shaped me, about the pain that taught me to see beyond vanity. I didn't come back to collect. I came back to correct. I looked at the former executives sitting in the front. Some lowered their gaze, others pretended not to understand. This company taught me everything I needed to know, including what I don't want to repeat. And if there's one thing I want to leave today, it's this: power without purpose is just an expensive form of destruction. The silence that followed was dense, almost spiritual. I saw something new in people's eyes. Not fear, not admiration. It was respect. Claire was in the front row with a slight smile. She knew what that moment meant. I took a deep breath and concluded. Today, Lexington stops being a symbol of arrogance and becomes a symbol of reinvention. Because when we understand the value of the fall, the ground stops being defeat and becomes foundation. The applause came slow but sincere, and amid the sound I felt a lump in my throat. In the end, the story wasn't about revenge. It was about healing. After the speech, I returned to the room where it all began. The same window, the same carpet, even the same scratch on the glass desk. I touched the cold surface and closed my eyes for a moment. 18 years ago, I left there feeling the world had ended. Now, I realize that sometimes fate doesn't destroy. It repositions. Richard entered without warning. He stood there, hands in pockets, not knowing what to say. "I know what you're going to do," he murmured. "No, Richard, you don't know." I took a folder and slid it toward him. Inside was a document. His retirement with all benefits guaranteed. "You're not going to fire me?" he asked, surprised. I smiled. "No. I just learned to do what you never knew. End stories the right way." He nodded in silence, and when he left the room, I felt something freeing inside me. A peace revenge could never give me.
That final signature wasn't to close a contract. It was to close a cycle. I stayed there alone, watching the city through the glass. Outside, traffic went on, impassive, as if the world hadn't ended or restarted. I thought of the boy I was, idealistic, naive, hungry for recognition. And I realized that of all the things I'd achieved, the most valuable was looking at the past without anger. It was the end, but also the beginning of something better. Before leaving, I left on the desk the same pen used in my firing and the company purchase. Small circles of destiny closed with ink and courage. I turned off the lights and walked to the elevator, the sound of footsteps echoing in the emptiness. When the doors closed, I felt my heart light. Revenge was over, but the story, finally, began. The following days were quiet. The press talked about the purchase, shareholders celebrated Lexton's recovery, but inside me there was only calm. It was strange. I'd spent half my life dreaming of this victory, and when it finally arrived, there was no explosion, just serene relief, like releasing a weight I'd carried for years. Maybe the true triumph was that, no longer needing to beat anyone. I gathered my new team, young people, talented, with fresh ideas and little patience for ego. Lexton is dead, I announced. Today, Cooper Industries begins. Their eyes lit up, not for the name change, but for what it meant, a rebirth. There, among papers and coffees, I realized the cycle was complete. I was no longer the man driven by pain. I was the leader, guided by purpose. That same afternoon, Claire came to my office. "So it's official?" "It is. The company has a new name."
And a new heart. She laughed and said, "You were always more than revenge, Ethan. It just took you time to realize." I looked at her, and for the first time in many years, felt gratitude. Not for winning, but for still having good people around. Before leaving, I left a final message to the team. If one day you're wronged, remember, the best response isn't destroying what hurt you. It's building something so grand the past no longer fits in it. They applauded, and I, in silence, felt I was leaving something bigger than myself. Over the months, Cooper Industries began to thrive. I revamped policies, invested in well-being, and gave opportunities to those the market had forgotten. Reports showed profit, but what made me prouder was seeing the smiles of people who believed in what we were creating. It was a company made of purpose, not ego. And deep down, it was the company I had always wanted to work for. One day, I received a letter from Richard. Handwritten, simple, without letterheads. He said he'd moved to the countryside, was running a bookstore, and finally slept well. At the end, he wrote, "Thank you for not destroying me. You gave me the kind of firing I never knew how to give." I smiled. Sometimes forgiveness arrives like a late letter, but it comes at the right time. Inviting Claire to be vice president was the most natural decision I made. She refused at first, but eventually accepted. "You need someone to remind you who you were in case you forget who you are," she joked. And she was right. Power is a treacherous mirror. It shows you the best and worst of yourself at the same time. Having someone to balance me was essential. That night, we went up to the building's rooftop together. The city pulsed below, alive and luminous. "Did you imagine getting here?" she asked. "Yes, but I didn't imagine it would be so quiet." She smiled. Silence is the sound of peace. And for some reason, I believed it. A year later, Cooper Industries became a benchmark for innovation and ethics in the market. The building, once a symbol of arrogance, now breathed empathy and purpose.
In the entrance hall, I had a simple plaque placed. What knocks us down also teaches us to rise. Every day I read it, like revisiting a scar, not to feel pain, but to remember it exists. One morning I arrived early and saw a young intern being reprimanded by a manager. The scene froze me. His expression, the nervousness in his hands, everything reminded me of myself. I approached and interrupted the scolding. "Let him breathe," I said to the manager. Then I looked at the boy and said, "Here we make mistakes to learn, and whoever judges you for falling is because they never had the courage to try." He smiled, relieved. And in that instant, I realized the cycle truly closed, not in signatures, not in victories, but in the simple act of breaking the pattern that destroyed me and preventing it from repeating. It was there that the past turned into legacy. The fired boy had become the man who gave second chances. Before leaving, I went to my old office and sat in the armchair. The sun crossed the glass, golding everything around. I took the pen, the same one, and wrote on a sheet, "Revenge brought me here. Forgiveness let me stay." I put the paper in the drawer, stood, and left the door open. As I walked down the hallway, I heard the office buzz, the laughter of people, the sound of life going on. And I smiled, because I finally understood it wasn't about destroying the past, it was about turning the end into a new beginning. And in that new beginning, I became who I always wanted to be.